Hello, and welcome to Sustainment TV. I'm your host, David McDonald, and we have a great show for you today. Today, we're discussing health issues, and I'm pleased to welcome to the show certified nutritional specialist, Lenise Perry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Here at Sustainment TV, we tend to tackle those issues that deal with family, finance, and health, and nothing is more important these days than discussing health issues, so I'm glad you were able to be with us today. Let's just jump right into this. Should teenagers take a vitamin supplement to meet their energy needs? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. I think all teenagers, regardless of their activity level, should be taking a multivitamin, a probiotic, and an omega-3 vitamin. If they are in sports or if they're athletic, you have to make sure that they're getting their protein, the proper amount of protein, before and after their workout or before and after their activity. And also hydration is really important, and hydration in the form of coconut water is a good natural form of getting good electrolytes. That's a substitute for Powerade, and what's the other one?
Powerade, Gatorade, stuff like that.
So staying hydrated and making sure they're getting the proper amount of protein before and after working out, and then taking a multivitamin is really important, especially since a lot of times teenagers have their food choices aren't the best. So I would say definitely taking a multivitamin is really important.
It's one of those things where a lot of people tend to just try to simplify. It's like, okay, well, the Band-Aid for their diet is a Flintstone vitamin and call it good, but the truth of the matter is a lot more consideration should go into it.
Absolutely, because they are usually still growing and still developing, and they may be going through puberty. The fact that they're still developing and they're sprouting means that they require more nutrients than the average adult. And then the fact that because they're coming into adulthood and learning about themselves a lot more, their food choices are more independent of their parents or what their parents or adults in their life would like for them to do. So there's a lot of changing going on in their bodies and for them socially, so making sure that they're getting the proper amount of nutrients is really important for their own development, for their own cognition, for how well they perform on the field.
Speaking of proper meal size, or whether it's how often they're eating, what proportion of meals is best for a teenager? I mean, 3 large meals, 6 small meals, somewhere in the middle. I mean, where are you at on as far as what's your recommendations?
I would say whole foods across the board as much as possible, because with them there's the concern for eating too much processed food, and then as frequently as possible. So they can do 3 large meals and then snacks in between. It all depends on their hunger. So with teenagers, I have teenagers, if they're hungry, then they can eat. Because they're still growing and they're still developing, they need those carbohydrates for brain health, they need the protein for a good building muscle mass and for concentration and things. I really don't encourage restriction of calories when it comes to teenagers. I just think just as long as they're eating whole, real foods and they're eating lots of vegetables and lots of color in their diet, then you can pretty much get away with eating as much as they need to help sustain them. I think this is also a good age to kind of help them with the idea of mindful eating. So that way they're not necessarily overeating, but they can recognize when they're about 80% full and they can say, okay, maybe I'll have a little bit more and that's it. But I think it's really important when it comes to children, growing children, that we don't restrict them too much when it comes to just eating real food. Like if they're hungry, go ahead and allow them to eat.
Okay, now I just wanted you to clarify for our audience, whole foods versus processed foods.
Yeah.
Give the difference, and maybe go a little bit into why processed foods are even part of a lot of families' staples. So go into that a little bit.
Well, processed foods are more convenient. They're advertised to be more convenient and easier to prep. along with fast foods and prepared foods. The only issue with foods that are processed is that something has been stripped from them, nutrients have been stripped, and additives have been added to it.
Okay.
So whenever you're eating foods that have been stripped of nutrients, a lot of times they're higher calorically. So if you compare regular russet potato to a potato chip, the russet potato has skin. The skin has lots of minerals in it, and then the potato itself, depending on how you cook it, you get your potassium and such. Whereas a potato chip, it's higher calorically, but the nutrient level is lower. So whenever you have that dynamic, which is pretty even across the board when it comes to the standard American diet, you have high caloric foods that are low in nutrients. That's where you get the weight gain, and that's where you get metabolic disorders like diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol and insulin resistance, because it's not a whole food. So the nutrients in it and the food isn't working synergistically together with your body, if that makes sense. And then with teenagers, because they're at a very critical development age and because they require more nutrients, if it's not getting in, then they're not getting what they need, and that can affect them from mood to their sleep patterns to how well they're able to concentrate in school. Like if you think about teenage girls, and they're going through their menstrual cycles, they're losing a lot of minerals as it is when they're menstruating. And then that in turn can affect how well they're able to concentrate in school, because there can be a anemia or iron deficiency.
Okay, so you mentioned diabetes, which it's the rate that this affects people is pretty alarming in our country.
And children too. Now children are getting it at much younger ages.
Yeah. So what should be a typical daily diet for someone that's trying to manage type 1 diabetes?
Type 1 or type 2?
Type 1.
Type 1, okay. So type 1 is autoimmunity, and generally type 1 has to be on insulin. And they pretty much just have to maintain healthy blood glucose levels. So, and that's with any low glycemic diet. Like you do need to have what's called a macronutrient complete meal, where you have your protein and your carbohydrates and your fat. So in this instance, all macronutrients aren't created equal. Like we were talking about whole foods and processed foods. Like a whole food is what it looks like when it's come off the tree, or it's grown off the vine, or it's being raised on the farm. Where it's processed, it's not really as recognizable as the way it should be. And so when it comes to diabetes, having a macronutrient complete meal, you want it to be with whole foods. So you want whole grains, and you want green leafy vegetables and colorful vegetables as your carbohydrate, foods high in fiber. And then you want a protein, which helps slow down the digestion of the sugar. So a good protein like lean meats and beans and nuts and seeds and fish. And then you want your good fats. So you want like the avocado, the olive oils, the fats from nuts and seeds and things like that.
I think one of the stigmas or misconceptions, or maybe for some people even a reality, is that when it comes to whole foods, they're more expensive money-wise as well as time-wise versus processed food. Is quick now, microwave, type of instant. At some point though, the table turns. It's like you're either going to invest properly in yourself in terms of diet. You're either going to do that sooner, or you're going to have medical issues that you have to manage later. So the buck stops here, I guess. In reference to the table turning on that.
No, that's true, and I think that if the concern is money, because the reality is there are a population of people who can't afford to eat healthy, but they're in a particular bracket to where they may be able to apply for certain assistance, like the SNAP program and things like that. If you're the in-between tax bracket and you're like, okay, well, how can I do this? There's ways of, excuse me, eating healthy and making sure you're getting those nutrients and still being, still being easy on your pocketbook. Now, it will require some time.
Sure.
So I encourage people to shop the periphery of the grocery store. So think about the aisles as the small intestine, and then the outer periphery as like the colon. So you stay along the colon.
Oh wow, okay.
And then that's where you have like the bakery, and you have the poultry section, and you have produce section. And then usually around the end somewhere you have like the frozen food section, and then you have like dairy and juices and things like that. So if you stay along those lines and stay out of the aisles where a lot of the processed foods are, I think, you know, maybe the brown rice and things, the whole grains you'll find in the aisle, but stick to those, then you can kind of eat healthy and save money. So as far as prepping the food, like I encourage, if you have very little time, I encourage an Instapot or a crock pot, so you can soak your beans and cook them in your crock pot or in your Instapot, and then you can get meats. Like there's different ways that you can kind of make it as easy as possible on yourself without necessarily spending like your whole day off trying to prep for the next week.
Right.
And that's what I help a lot of my clients with, just kind of being able to navigate between what they can afford and what they can physically do, depending on their lifestyle. Because there's some people that are single parents and they're working 2 jobs and going to school, you know, and it's just a matter of figuring out and coming to the table and saying, okay, what can be done? And then you just start off small and you work your way from there.
In reference to trying to reinforce those good dietary choices, specifically speaking of vegetables, in your opinion, what's the best vegetable to eat and why?
The best vegetable? I say the best vegetable to eat is probably the one that you like. So when you mentioned your children, and I'm assuming like trying to get them to eat vegetables, whatever that vegetable is that you like or they like, then you kind of focus on that, because that's like a starting point. You have to meet people where they are, and a lot of times with kids you have to meet them where they are. So if it's carrots because it's sweet, then you say, okay, we're gonna have some carrots tonight, and then you slowly start to add other things and try other things. But from the perspective of a parent who's trying to get their child to eat vegetables, just make it, when they eat it, make it a big deal, you know, give them lots of praise. For some children who are picky eaters and maybe they have sensory issues and that's why they don't necessarily like to eat, some people are proponents of what's called the Trojan method, and that's the Trojan horse method, and that's just hiding the vegetables in foods that they like.
Oh, okay.
So like making muffins and, you know, putting certain vegetables in it that like don't have much of a taste to them, like spinach, or just hiding different foods in smoothies. You know, sometimes you can get away with that with kids, depending on their age, depending on what issues they're dealing with. And then also, children basically do what their parents do. So if we're showing them that, you know, we're eating healthy, then they're going to want to eat what's on our plate.
Gotcha. All right, well, we're definitely going to come back to this. I know that this is definitely a, you know, specifically talking nutrition. I mean, there are many topics. You know, some are well publicized in the media, and some aren't. And I definitely intend to try to address as many as I can, and definitely we want to have you back on the show to do another segment. This is Sustainment TV with David McDonald, Denise Perry, board certified, I may add, nutrition specialist, and we hope that something has been presented that even at worst case scenario, something that may be presented you may want to do more research on, or maybe something that was shared that you know, opened your eyes to something that you may not have known. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.